Okay, welcome AP World History students, Chapter 30, The Making of Industrial Society. This is the Industrial Revolution, which is a pretty good chapter. It's another long one. It is, but not quite as many names as the last chapter, more ideas and themes, as you'll see. All right, so really what you need to know is that the Industrial Revolution is going to begin in Britain. And there are certain factors that you have to be industrialized. Coal and steam are the energy source, replacing medieval items such as wind power and water power, and then, of course, human and animal power. We're getting coal and steam that are going to run machines for us. We are turning to a new thing called factories instead of cottage industries, basically, where people are building things out of their homes. You're going to see a decline in rural agriculture, meaning basically people out farming on land. And you're going to see urban city manufacturing increasing. Transportation revolution is going to be a byproduct of the Industrial Revolution. We're going to be producing so much material, so many commodities, and so much stuff that we have to have a way to get it to market. And we're going to do that through the use of trains, which changes the world dramatically. Automobiles are eventually going to make their way, and of course, we'll get the big canal boom and get steamboats. There is also another creation of new classes. You get the industrial middle class, these people who have managed to get better paying industrial jobs, which kind of takes a little bit, but it does create a new middle class. You have the urban proletariat, basically the city poor. You get a shift in political power away from the nobility and towards these new capitalist owners of factories and business owners. Business owners will be the new, basically, ones who take over the world, whereas the nobles had been the ones who had ran things before. You also get new political systems in a response to the Industrial Revolution. It's very important that you remember short and long-term cause and effect when you talk about the Industrial Revolution. Short-term effects are kind of negative: reduced lifespans, terrible working conditions, spread of diseases, environmental disaster. Those are all short-term effects that you should probably be writing down in your notes. But long-term effects, you're going to see a rise in the standard of living. You're going to see better pay. You're going to see countries become rich and powerful because of industrialized countries. Make no mistake, the earliest countries in the Industrial Revolutions, the ones that got it first, Britain, America, and some other European places like Germany, Japan, over in the East, they are going to be the new lords of the earth because the Industrial Revolution is going to give them many advantages. Now, like I said, there are unexpected costs, environmental catastrophes, cutting down of trees, toxic, these toxins being released from these factories into the rivers, and nobody's really caring about that. The bosses are thinking about money. The governments of the nations are thinking about money. So nobody really cares about the environment early on. You get a lot of landless proletariat, basically meaning, not that many people own land before, but even less are owning land now because they're migrating to the cities to work in a building, basically, in these factories. So nobody in those cities is owning land. Again, starts in Great Britain. Dates change. I've seen so many different dates for the Industrial Revolution, and your last period was 1450 to 1750. And the 1750 date is the very nice, round, convenient date for the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, which marks the end of that era and the beginning of this particular era, 1750 to 1900. We do know it begins in Great Britain, possibly as early as 1733. So we kind of round it out. It's definitely at 1750. It's definitely going really well by the 1780s. So it follows a little bit of another agricultural revolution where we're getting more food surplus, which has helped leading to disposable income. Our populations are increasing. That means that there's a market of people to buy stuff. It also means that there's plenty of cheap labor for these factories. I mean, people are going to be leaving the farms in large numbers. These farm families might have 9, 10, 11 children. And, eventually some of those mouths become liabilities. And so they leave the farm to go to the city for a new life. Now, Britain has many advantages that you should be aware of. They have a strong banking tradition because they've been a powerhouse for several hundred years. And they have those all important natural resources. They have coal, they have iron. These are the backbone of the Industrial Revolution. It's also easy for them to transport goods in Britain. Remember that the country is not large, and it's an island, and it has rivers that you can put your goods on a boat, sell them down the river to a port, and then boom, they're off and you're trading. So this was a big advantage for Britain. They have a market. They have all these colonies, including the 13 colonies over here in America, and that's going to mean that they always have buyers. They're going to exploit America and India and their other colonies for raw resources, which they're going to turn into finished products and turn around and sell those back to their colonies. Cotton really is the first important industry in the Industrial Revolution. There are many inventions. This is a very inventive time period because these inventions are going to lead to money. Money's the driving force here. The flying shuttle doubled the weaving output without doubling the supply of yarn. That's a huge bonus. There's money. Spinning jenny in 1768 increased the supply of yarn. It's faster than the flying shuttle could process, so it's a better version of the flying shuttle. And eventually get power looms and things that go with it. Every time we need something to make more of a product or a better, higher quality product, human minds come together and they invent it. Factories are going to grow. Massive machines are built to create these products. A huge supply of labor is needed, and they're coming. They're going to come to the cities. And then again, transportation revolution is a byproduct of the Industrial Revolution. We got to be able to get raw materials. Then we got to turn around and be able to get finished product to our markets. The concentration of population is in these newly built factory towns on the rivers. So you're going to have these new towns that begin as factory towns based upon the production of, say, in this case, textiles. And people are going to flock to them. They're going to be on the rivers because the rivers help supply power. And most importantly, the rivers are the transportation highway in the early days before the train. Now, the train's going to change everything when it shows up. New sources of power. The steam engine is one of the greatest inventions in history. It is a game changer. James Watt is credited with the steam engine. It uses coal to fire it up. And basically, you hook machines up to steam engines, and they drive shafts and gears and all that good stuff. It replaces water wheels and things like that used to move the gears and the pulleys. So what's going to be important about the steam engine is that you can really move factories away from the rivers. You don't have to be on the river once you pair the steam engine with a steam locomotive once you get the train. All right, so cotton, big one, as you can see the numbers there. Cotton becomes just an enormous, important commodity to Britain. They're getting cotton from America. They're getting cotton from India. They're supplying Britain with that raw product. And Britain's going to turn around and pump out a bunch of clothes for people to buy. Now, there's some implications on slave labor. It's going to mean that there is definitely a market for slave labor in the American South where they can buy cotton. And the Southerners have decided that their best profit motive is to have African slaves working on their plantations, that this is the way that they can make the most money. This becomes part of the transatlantic slave trade, of course. And while there was early movements to abolish slavery in Britain, the almighty dollar is all powerful. And so the profit motive is still there. Iron industry is hugely important. Henry Court devises this new method of refining iron ore. And, of course, we've been working with iron for thousands of years, but essentially the way we used iron was the same for thousands of years. But Court devises this new method. It makes better iron. Eventually, we're going to get better steel. And steel is just, it's the backbone of the Industrial Revolution. So you're getting this with that word synergy. They're working together, right? Like syncretic religions that blend together. So you have a blending of this with technological development. Again, the 1750 and beyond becomes this age of technological wonders. 1804, we finally get it. Our first steam-powered locomotive. Not impressive by today's standards, but I'm sure just incredibly amazing to the people of the time. 10 tons, it can carry 20,000 pounds. It's quite a bit, and 70 passengers at a brisk 5 miles an hour. So just a little bit faster than most people walk. But just a few short years later, we get the rocket, which travels from Liverpool to Manchester, England, at a very nice 16 miles an hour. So about the speed most people can run. There's some that run faster, but most of you are probably going to be running 16-mile-an-hour range. But of course, the train doesn't get tired, and it can carry heavy loads, so it's hugely important. Massive ripple effect on industrialization. It's going to make industrialization even more profitable, which is going to turn around and make more incentive to make better trains. I mean, eventually you're going to get a steam locomotive that travels 120 miles an hour later on in the age. So trains are a huge deal. In American history, we talk about how the train really changes America dramatically. Now, the factory system, remember, we've got a transformation here. In the early days of the factory system, you had the putting out system. Basically, the owner would give raw products to his workers who would take them home. Say it's in the textile industry. They would take it home and they would make shirts and dresses and stuff at home. And then at the end of the week, they would bring their finished dresses back to the employer. This is important because it's working around the wage restrictions of guilds who kind of protected workers and stuff like this and protected their businesses. But this gets around them, and it's going to put them out of work. Basically, it's going to get rid of those medieval guilds that were so powerful for so long. But factories are also going to replace the putting out system, and they have these enormous machines that have been built, and you certainly can't send them home with your workers. It just makes more sense to bring the workers to your large, enormous building to do this work. And urbanization, this rapid movement to the cities, everybody's flocking to the cities for a new job. They want to get off the farm. They're tired of seeing cows and sheep and whatnot, tired of milking cows and stuff. And so they're flocking to the cities. That guarantees a supply of cheap and unskilled labor. And that's important because unskilled labor don't have any leverage. Skilled workers are more important. They're more rare, so they have more leverage. The history of the Industrial Revolution is going to be also a history of strikes and unions and things like that. Again, short-term effect, majorly poor working conditions. You're talking 14 hours a day that people are working. Supervision is tight and harsh. Workers can be hit with belts by overseers. It's really rough. None of us would want to work in this time period. You had a famous protest early on, one of the earliest ones, the Luddite protest there in Britain. As you can see, it's about a 5-year protest based off this legend about a boy named Ludlum who broke a knitting frame. And then the leader of this movement is called King Lud. The most important thing you need to know about the Luddite protest, and you do need to know it because I can see it popping up on your AP exam. The Luddites are popular. This is kind of the John Henry versus the steam engine story, where you want John Henry to win because the steam engine is putting people out of work. Machine is replacing man. It's a theme. And that's what was going on over here. So these Luddites are fighting on behalf of man over machine. But money's more powerful than either. And so money will end up winning. So 14 Luddites were hung in 1813, and the movement eventually dies out. And, of course, the Industrial Revolution is up and going. It is going to spread. There's development of technical schools for engineers who are massively important, and for architects. Massive government support for large public works such as canals and the rail system. The government see what's going on. They know how important the Industrial Revolution is, and they're going to subsidize this. You're going to see this in America too. The government is always on the side of the railroads. They're always on the side of the businesses at the expense of common people because it's a commonwealth system, that the rails and these factories are better for America as a whole, or in this case, Britain as a whole. Industrialization spreads from Great Britain. It's going to come to America. It's going to go to Germany. It's going to be used and employed under Bismarck. Oftentimes in America, it's called the Second Industrial Revolution. Massively important to America's development, without a doubt. And Britain tried to keep this secret. They was against the law. If you were a mechanic And mechanic back then meant something a little bit different, but you were massively important if you were a mechanic and knew how to work on the machines in the factories. You weren't allowed to leave Britain for another country. But a man named Samuel Slater would break that rule, and he would come to America in the early 1800s, and he had memorized the entire layout of the factory that he worked for, and he builds his own factory in America, and he goes from being a mechanic to, the owner of a mill, the owner of a factory, and becomes, nice and wealthy. So they couldn't contain it. They just couldn't. Here's a map, industrial Europe circa 1850. It's kind of hard to read, but you can see kind of the networks of major industrial cities, and those are going to be linked by railroads. You can see England's position in the North Sea and the English Channel, how easy it would be to trade, and then they can get to the Atlantic Ocean and trade with America, of course. Mass production becomes a very big thing. Eli Whitney's an important American name. He invents something you've probably heard of called the cotton gin. And the cotton gin is massively important. It really keeps slavery going in America. It's possible slavery would have died out without the invention of this machine, which made cotton farming vastly more profitable. It makes plantation owners richer, but at the expense of more slaves being in America, and slavery eventually leading us down the path to the Civil War. Henry Ford, very important, as you can see much later down the line right here in 1913. He's famous for developing this assembly line approach. Basically, if you work for Henry Ford, you might just turn 3 screws and attach the steering wheel to the column. And that's what you do all day, every day. So simple, a caveman can do it, and you're going to do it all daggum day. I imagine it was riveting, and the people loved their jobs. Well, they did love their jobs working for Henry Ford because he paid them more money than anybody else, and he changes the way that factories treat their workers. So there's a lot of good with Henry Ford. It drives down the price of the automobile tremendously. His assembly line approach meant that he could build a Model T every 93 minutes versus 728 minutes before. So vastly important, and it does help drive down the price of cars. All right, industrialization, more specifically in the United States. In 1800, we're a new country, and we are most definitely agrarian. We are based off of agriculture. About 90 to 95% of Americans are engaged in farming, whether they're poor farmers or rich farmers. We only have a population of about 5 million people, and not a single city of 100,000 people. But by 60 years, by 1860, on the verge of the Civil War, we have industrialized in the North and the Midwest, and we have a population of 30 million people. We have 9 cities of over 100,000, and only half, 50% of Americans are still engaged in farming, and that number is going to continue to drop. Typical workday for, in this case, this is a case study here for Berlin, Germany in 1844. Your workday starts at 6 a.m. Remember, the workday starts at 6 a.m. So you're getting up earlier than that so you can get to work on time and all that good stuff. And you work from then until 7 p.m. You get 2 hours for meals. Okay, so you get a little bit of that time back. Lateness penalties. 2 minutes, you were fined half an hour. If you were 2 minutes late, you were fined half an hour's pay. If you were more than 2 minutes, then an entire partial shift was your fine. Conversation was prohibited. You were not allowed to talk, and you had to use toilets, which sounds like a good thing. All right, proletariat. Again, that's your working class people. And you're giving the short term of the Industrial Revolution is dark, very dark, ecologically speaking, and psychologically speaking to the people that worked in these days. And it's going to give rise to socialism, to communism under Karl Marx and Frederick Engels. And that, it's an answer to capitalism, basically. So the Industrial Revolution and capitalism are going to go hand in hand without a doubt. Oh, sorry. Okay, so distribution of wealth in 1800. The richest 10% versus the other 90% is almost half and half. That's awesome. But by 1860, look how much the richest 10, how many percentage of the population they are versus the other 90. Okay. What you have is a widening economic gap. The gap between the rich and the poor grows because of the Industrial Revolution. I mean, you have factory owners who are getting in just enormously rich, yacht buying, island buying, super rich dudes, richer than any American, any person alive today. The robber barons, the captains of industry of this time period. You get a new class, evolved from the guild merchants and cities, sometimes called the bourgeoisie. These are capitalists. And eventually they're going to eclipse the power and status of agrarian landed classes. This was really difficult in Britain, where you had a tradition of nobility, for 1,000 years basically, and they were used to people tipping their caps and bowing down to them and giving them special status. Well, these capitalists, these owners of the factories, eventually get richer than them, and they don't have noble blood in them, but money talks, and they don't want to bow down to somebody just because of their last name when they know that they have more money and more power than them. So you have that's very important social distinction you need to keep in mind with the Industrial Revolution. Big business, large factories require startup money, without a doubt. There's got to be investment. And so people band together in something called corporations. It's sort of like joint stock companies, right? And that is to share the risk of investment and to help maximize their profits. Britain and France laid the foundations for the modern corporation in the 1850s and 1860s. America will certainly borrow these ideas. Private businesses were owned by hundreds or even thousands, or in some case, millions of stockholders. So you can buy a piece of Walmart. You go buy a single share of Walmart stock, and you are, technically speaking, a partial owner of Walmart. Not a rich one or a powerful one, but hey, investors get dividends if profitable. They lose only their investment in the case of bankruptcy. So, you're only out for what you put in, but you have the opportunity to get a return on interest, or return on investment, should I say. All right. But unfortunately, another dark side to the Industrial Revolution is the development of monopolies, trusts, cartels, and these things. Large corporations formed blocks which would drive out competition. Competition is immensely important in capitalism to keep prices down. Monopolies basically ran their competition out, and then they could charge whatever, and you had to have what they were selling. If there was only one company that sold cell phones, you know how important the cell phone is today. They could charge whatever they wanted, and people would be like druggies. They'd be out there stealing stuff to get their money to buy a cell phone because they wanted it so bad. J.D. Rockefeller, one of the most important names in American industrial history, controlled almost all the oil drilling, the processing, the refining, and the marketing in the United States. In Germany, you had IG Farben, which controlled 90% of chemical production. Again, and Rockefeller and those guys are going to pioneer movements like vertical integration and horizontal integration, where they control all the aspects of production. And it's going to make them rich. J.D. Rockefeller was worth, in today's money, over $300 billion. The most I've seen recently in the last 100 years or so is about $120 billion. There's a huge difference between $300 billion and $100 billion. Governments were often slow to control monopolies. It certainly was the case in America. And you're not really going to start getting any kind of control on them until the late 1800s. It just takes a while because the big businesses they have powerful lobbyist groups, they're rich and powerful. And to be fair to them, the countries, these nations as a whole, are benefiting from them. Unfortunately, a lot of people are getting ground up at the bottom. Fruits of industrialization. Here, technological innovation.